My name is Ernest Hardmon III. I'm going to be speaking today about the legacy of slavery. Ma'afa, that's the African word for the African Holocaust, or they call it the Holocaust of Enslavement. I'll also be talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome, PTSS. Asanga Edom, Hotep, Abaragani, Alafia. For my American friends, yo, what's up? First, I greet you in the language of my ancestors to make you aware of the African culture I represent. Then I call upon my spiritual advisors to sit with me to assure that my speech represents truth and respectability. And if needed, these ancestors will assist me with my walk. When looking back into any history of a people, their name can prompt a reflection on the land of the people, the history of the people, and the culture of the people. Color designation such as black is not land designation. Black tells you how you look, not who you are. Black people have no designated land because we lost connection with land of our origin when we were taken from Africa. Furthermore, the land we came to after being taken from Africa is not designated as our land, despite the fact that our forefathers worked that land and some were promised to receive a share of that land. Remember 40 acres and a mule, reparation, and things of that sort. We as African Americans have been deprived of land designation, and our self-love was stolen from us when we were taken from Africa. Here are some facts about the cultural heritage of black people. The first Africans in America arrived as indentured servants. Some call them domestic slaves, via Chesapeake Bay, Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Indentured servants are servants that work for a period of time to obtain their freedom, usually 4 to 7 years. In 1640, Maryland became the first colony to institutionalize slavery, which changed the African slave status to chattel slaves. Institutionalized slavery and chattel slavery is when you work for the master for free. The Portuguese were the first to embark upon slave trade about 1562. Now the Portuguese, they tricked Mandingo. He was the ruler of the Congo. They tricked him because they wanted the indentured slaves. They wanted slaves that were slaves of war. And what the Europeans did, they just wanted more. They was greedy. They wanted more and more slaves. So what they did was they kept on getting more and more and more. And the king wrote them plenty of letters and tried to make contact that stopped slavery. The prime area of slaves was on the west coast of Africa called the Sudan. It was ruled by 3 major empires, Ghana, Mali, and Sudan. African tribal wars produced captives, which became a source of supply of slaves in the European slave market. Other Africans were kidnapped by African slave hunters or by the European slave hunters. The main bartering trading sources used by the Europeans to secure African slaves was glass beads, whiskey, ivory, and guns. Let's talk a little bit about the Middle Passage. Some authors refer to the Middle Passage routes as the triangle trade, the three-corner, the roundabout, and the transatlantic. The Middle Passage was a journey of African slaves from their homeland to the Americas, later known as the United States of America. The British went south, down the coast of Africa. Then unsuspected Africans, just doing their daily chores, walking around, were attacked and enslaved. They were put in shackles, left leg to the right leg, and bound, chains around their arms and bracelets around their neck. They were marched to either European ships or to waiting areas called baroons, better known as slave barracks, dungeons, or slave castles. Now in those ships, the stink was unbelievable. They were sitting side by side about 5 inches apart, and they couldn't urinate. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to just urinate on themselves. They got sick. They would just throw up on themselves. It was very horrible times back then. The voyage of the Middle Passage continued from Africa on slave ships going across the Atlantic Ocean with the designation several ports. West Indies was one, the Caribbean, Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Santo Domingo, St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix, and last but not least, Barbados. The African slave transported by way of Middle Passage became an easily identified group targeted as being inferior, feeble-minded, subhuman, infidels, and destined for servitude. The slave ships to the Americas generally took about 4 to 6 months and carried from 300 to 400 people. They generally lost 2/3 of their cargo, either to sickness or they just jumped overboard. Once the African slaves arrived in the United States, many of them ran off and escaped. They went to vast wildernesses in the undeveloped American countryside. This particular group of slaves was called Maroons. They were later called Black Indians. There was many slave revolts. There was the Gabriel Posse of Richmond, Virginia, the Denmark Vesey, a free man from Richmond, Charleston, South Carolina, and last but not least, there was that Nat Turner from Southampton County, Virginia. There's plenty of movements. We had the movement of the Underground Railroad with Harriet Moses Tubman, who took 300 people out of slavery. Then we had the Harper Ferry movement by Mr. John Brown. In summary, in closing, we must admit that the African American history has had an overwhelming effect on our lives present today. We must at all times, make an attempt at healing the emotional, physical, and mental subliminal innate scars of our African history and heritage. These scars are deeply embedded in our years of struggle and have resulted in the miseducation and masterful programming of our minds, the slave consciousness, which places limits on the successes of future generations to come. We can remove these scars by developing our family, community, educational, and unity of people that stands by us. We also need a spiritual outlet. The mental health issues and effects of slavery, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, PTSS, is a condition that exists when a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery. Sadly, we continue to be traumatized by the oppression and racism we experience today. But added to this condition is the belief, real or imagined, that the benefit of this society in which we live are not accessible to us. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, PTSS, is a systematic dehumanization of African slaves, which was the initial trauma of slavery. Generations of our descendants have borne the scars of PTSS. The author, Dr. Joy Leary, feels that the real recovery from ongoing trauma on slavery and racism has to start from within, consciousness. Madasi.